Hi, it's Amy from Amorini Designs, and today I am here to share with you how to make these darling foundation paper pieced tree stockings. There is a simple version, there is a staggered version, and the pattern also includes how to make a patchwork version of the stocking. These are lined and they have a cute little hanger, and they are so fun and quick to sew together. It's a great way to get introduced to foundation paper piecing, and I'm going to walk you through all of the steps to do it. So let's grab our fabrics and get started. Since we're talking fabric, let's talk fabric selection. The first tip I have is to make sure you have plenty of contrast between your background fabric and your trees. You want to make sure that that really stands out. It doesn't mean that you can't have a pattern here, but I recommend something that is not super dark or super intense so that you don't lose your tree. The other thing I'm going to recommend for this foundation paper piece is to use something without a direction to it. So you want to make sure you're not using text prints or something with a really solid pattern like a stripe or something that has a definite up or down, because you're going to be fighting it trying to get your angles lined up with your foundation paper piecing, and we want to make this as beginner friendly as we can. So pick something that's non-directional. This dot fabric is really a fantastic choice. The sample I'm going to show you, I'm going to use this as my background. I think that it's going to be such beautiful contrast with the dark green tree. So it doesn't have to be a super simple background, but I do recommend making sure that it's going to stand out so that your tree will really shine. For your patchwork, you could use a charm pack. A charm pack will get you actually 2 patchwork fronts, or you can use a mini charm pack. You may need a little bit more than one for one stocking front. You're also going to need the back of your stocking. I recommend a fat quarter. You could also get 1/3 of a yard. That would get you 2 separate backs. You also are going to need your lining. I do think that it's great to use a basic here for the lining because you don't really see it. I'm using, this is a paparazzi from Riley Blake Designs, and I love how it looks with this berry and pine fabric from Lella Boutique. This one is actually one of Lella Boutique's older lines for her Christmas line, but they blend together really great. You're also going to need some batting for your stocking front so that you can give it a nice quilted textured look. And in order to do the quilting on the front, I do recommend using a backing fabric for your batting. It just helps the quilting go a lot smoother. And for that, I recommend a solid, you could use a muslin, some inexpensive fabric, because it's inside the inside of the stocking, so you really won't see that at all. Now that we have all of our fabric selection underway, let's get started making. Now let's get ready to gather our supplies. You are going to need to print your foundation paper piece template and your 4 stocking template pieces. On each page, there is a little 1-inch square. You'll want to use your ruler and just double check that measures exactly 1 inch. Now, you should have your printer set to print actual size. Sometimes they are trying to squeeze it in or get it to fit differently. So make sure that that's 1 inch so that you don't end up with a stocking that's a different size than you were hoping. All right, once you have those done, the next step is to cut out all of the stocking pieces along the solid outer lines. You're going to have 4 different stocking pieces. Then we're going to start putting these 4 pieces together. We're starting with pairs. Now we're going to overlap our piece 1 and piece 2, and you're going to use the dotted line as your guide for lining those up. So once you have them lined up, then you're going to tape those into place. I like to tape them on both sides so I don't have any flappy bits. And then you're going to do the same thing with pieces 3 and 4. Again, there's these nice dotted overlapping lines here. So you're just going to use those to line them up. If you want, you can lift this up and you can see through there that the end of piece 3 is lining up with that line on piece 4, just to double check and make sure everything is lined up great. Again, you're going to tape these into place. And then you are going to bring piece 1 and 2 and overlap it with this piece 3, 4. Again, you have a line here on piece 3 And it should actually also extend onto piece 4. And then you're going to line those up. Again, tape both sides. You should have all the edges lining up as well. And then make sure those are taped so that you have your stocking template ready to go. In addition to your fabric, there's some other tools that will make this a lot simpler. A smaller rule is going to be really helpful when it comes to doing your foundation paper piecing. I actually like to set up a little station over by my sewing machine where I can cut and trim and press all at the same time. I'll share a little clip of that once we get to that stage. But you will also need a rotary cutter. It's really helpful for trimming down all of the pieces. And if you have it, a light pad is super helpful for making sure that your fabric is lining up with the lines on your paper piecing templates. So if you have one, it's really helpful. If you don't have one, you can use a bright light or a window to do the same thing. It's just nice to be able to lay everything down and kind of pin it while it's there. So those are some of the tools you'll want to use. Of course, you'll need to print off all of your templates and things, so you want to make sure that you have access to a printer. And I think that's all. Are we ready? Let's get started. This is my setup for when I'm foundation paper piecing. Over here, I have a cutting mat and my light pad so that I can make sure that I'm positioning things right on my foundation paper piecing. I, of course, have my sewing machine. Now, one thing with your sewing machine, if you do this a lot, I recommend having a needle that you kind of just use for your foundation paper piecing. It's going to dull your needle fairly quickly because you're going to be sewing through paper. So I would swap out for your needle and put a new one in. Otherwise, just use your needle and know that you're probably going to want to discard it once you're done. Over here, right next to my machine, I have my little pressing station. I love my little Oliso mini iron. I do have a quilter's clapper. It's basically just a piece of wood that sits on the pieces of fabric as they're cooling. It really helps keep those seams nice and sharp, but that's totally optional and not something you absolutely have to have. Of course, you want to make sure you have your pins, and a little bit of light starch is helpful with your fabrics before you cut out your pieces, just to help with the pressing and keeping those creases nice and sharp so that everything comes out great on your foundation paper piecing. So this is how I have my machine set up and my area for foundation paper piecing. So we're ready to sew. We're going to start with our hanging strap. We're going to take our piece of fabric and press it in half along the length. You're going to open up that fold, bring in the 2 raw edges into the middle, give that a good press, and then refold your original crease to create an entirely enclosed strip. So there's no raw edges except these 2 short ends. Then we're going to take this to our machine and we're going to sew an edge stitch down both of the long sides of our strip. So now we have our hanging strap all sewn and we're going to set that aside. Today I'm going to show you how to do the simple tree foundation paper piece. Because once you have this down, then the staggered one is exactly the same. It just has a few more steps in it. So we're going to begin by placing our trunk fabric first. Now, the part that I think people find the most tricky about foundation paper piecing is it's basically a color. You're filling this in with color, and the color is fabric, but you're doing it on the opposite side. So you're actually making a mirror image of the piece that you see in front of you. So we're going to place our fabric right side up on the back piece. Now I have this plastic sewing table here, which makes it really nice to be able to kind of see the shadowing underneath there. But I'm also going to show you what this looks like when you use the light pad. Now I have my light table here, and you can see how much more clearly you can see the lines on the wrong side of this paper. So it's actually printed on this side, and now it is face down. So my fabric is going to be right side up on the wrong side of the paper. And you want to make sure that your fabric piece covers the entire trunk piece here, which is why I have this cut big enough to give me at least 1/4 of an inch overhang on all 4 sides of the piece that I want to cover. So I'm going to line that up right here, and I like to just give it a quick little pin into place so that it doesn't shift on me. Now I'm going to flip this over, and I don't need my light right now. And I am going to fold back my paper on this line between the trunk and piece 1. So I'm just going to use what I can see through on the back side here, and I'm going to fold right on that line. And it's important that you get this fold as accurate as you can, because this is going to determine your seam allowances. All right, so I have that folded here, and now I'm going to use my ruler here, and I am going to trim this so that there's only 1/4 of an inch of fabric from where the edge of this fold line, so where I'm going to stitch is right on that line. Make sure that there's just 1/4 of an inch of fabric overlapping there. So let me swap out and get my cutting stuff set up. Using my ruler, again, I am measuring 1/4 of an inch from that fold. I'm going to trim down my fabric piece here so that I just have my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance overhanging there. I'm going to unfold this piece, and now we're going to flip it back over so that we can place our second piece of fabric. This is fabric piece number 1, and I am going to lay it down right sides together on my trunk piece. Now, you may need to double check by flipping it back over that you are putting it on the line between pieces 1 and the trunk, so that you are making the opposite side. And this is where I think that mirror image flipping around really kind of messes with your mind just a little bit. So you just slow it down and make sure that you are paying close attention. So I am going to lay these down. Now, if you are not sure if you've got this in the right place, if you keep your finger here like you've just sewn that seam and flip it back over, you can make sure, okay, yes, that is covering my piece number 1 right here, which is exactly what I want it to do. So I'm going to pull this pin out and replace it so it's holding both pieces against my paper. Now I want to make sure that when I place this pin, I'm keeping it a good distance away from this line here, because I don't want that pin to interfere with me sewing this seam. Here we are at the machine. Now I have lowered my stitch length down to about a 1.5. Doing a shorter stitch length is going to help pull the paper out easier and give you a few more stitches to secure these pieces together. Now you see I have my fabric pinned on this side, and I'm going to flip my paper over, and then I am going to sew right on this line between my trunk and my fabric piece number 1, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and ending of my stitching row, but do not stitch over that, because we're going to be trimming away things and we want to make sure that we don't lose the integrity of that seam. So back stitch at the beginning and the end. Again, take your time to make sure that you're getting your stitches to start and stop where you want them to. I apologize, I did not realize that my camera was slowly sliding down, but we got the gist of it anyway. And you can see that I have that seam all lined up there. Now what I'm going to do is trim my threads, and actually I like to do it on both sides at this point, so the front and the back. I'm going to pull out this pin, and then I am going to use my iron to press piece 1 away from my trunk piece. Now you want to make sure that you are pressing it straight, and just hit it with a little bit of heat right there. Now that I have that pressed, I am going to repeat the steps. I am going to first flip this over. Now I don't have to pin anymore because now it's already secured to my paper. I'm going to flip it back over, and now I am going to move on to piece 2. So I'm going to fold my paper back on that line between the trunk and piece 2. I am going to use my little ruler here and my rotary cutter, and I'm going to trim 1/4 of an inch away from this folded edge and my get rid of any extra fabric there. And doing that helps prevent any unnecessary shadowing where you can see darker fabrics behind and that kind of thing. I'm going to unfold the paper here, and then I am going to bring my fabric piece 2, place it right sides together, right there on that line that I just trimmed. Now I'm going to bring my pin back and keep this piece in place, pinning all the way through the paper if you can. It will just help keep everything secure. And then I am going to take this to my machine, and I am going to sew on this line between the trunk and fabric piece 2. The next step is the line between our trunk piece and our tree. So again, I'm going to fold it along that line. And now that you can see why it was important that we not extend our sewing beyond the solid line, because we want to be able to fold this back accurately on that line. And we're going to, again, use our ruler here along that fold. Make sure that we only have our 1/4 inch seam. We're going to unfold, and then we are going to place our tree fabric. Now, if you had a directional tree fabric here, you would want to make sure that the bottom of your tree fabric is at the edge next to the trunk, so that when you flip it over, it will be going the right direction. So again, if you have some directionality to your tree fabric, it's really a good time to just double check and make sure that it is going the direction you actually want it to. Now, the other thing that I'm doing here, I want to make sure that my tree fabric here is extending 1/4 inch beyond both sides here. So I'm making sure that I'm centering it. Even though I have a little bit of extra fabric down here, I'm not trying to center this tree fabric piece on the sewn fabric. I'm trying to center it on the part that I need it to cover. So I'm going to line up my cut edge with the cut edge of the fabric, but I'm going to center the sides according to the tree piece here that I can see through the back. So once I'm happy with how that's positioned, again, I'm going to pin this in place and try to keep my pin out of the way of that line that I'm going to sew. And then I'm going to take it to my machine and sew along this line here between the trunk piece and my tree. Now I have my tree piece in place, and I'm going to continue adding pieces following the numbers. So the next piece I'm going to do is piece number 3. Going to fold back on that line. Grab my ruler, make sure that it is 1/4 inch away. And then I'm going to take my fabric piece 3, right sides together, line it up with that cut edge. One thing that's important to note here with our fabric piece 3 is that we are sewing this on an angle. So I showed you on the tree piece that we were trying to center the fabric along the part that was going to be covered by the fabric piece. But I want to show you, if I come in and I pin this right along where this seam is and leave the fabric where it is right now, it's not exact, but it's close. I'm going to fold this over, and I'm going to show you that up here at the top, we are missing a little bit of coverage here with our fabric. And that's because we're sewing at an angle. So when you have an angle that you're dealing with, you need to slide your fabric piece up a little bit to make sure that once it's folded over at that angle, that you're going to cover the top and the bottom of your pieces. So this is where it is really handy to, like I just showed you, use your pins, and you can just kind of approximate that 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. You do have that crease that you made to cut down your 1/4 inch seam allowance, but that will give you a good idea of if you are covering the entire part that needs to be covered. I can see my lines here, and I know that every part that I need to be covered with this background fabric is getting covered. So I am happy with where that is placed. And now I'm going to move my pins so that they're not on that seam that I am trying to sew. So now there's piece 3, and we're going to move on to piece 4. We're almost done with our foundation paper piecing. So again, folding on that line, making sure I'm as accurate as I can be with that fold. Trim our seam allowance here. And take our piece 4. Again, we're making sure that with our angles that we're covering up all of the places that need to be, making sure that it's extending beyond on all the sides that we can, pinning that into place. Now we have all of our foundation paper piecing done. We are going to take this to the back, and we are going to trim away at these outside corners of our foundation paper piece block. I like to use the lines on my ruler and the lines on the paper to make sure that I'm lining everything up nice and straight. And now we have our nice square tree block. Now we're going to take our fabric piece 8 and we are going to sew it to the side towards the fabric piece 4 so that we are centering our tree onto our fabric piece so that when we go to cut it out using our template, we have our tree, we are able to get that nice and centered. Before I sew fabric B piece to the bottom of this, I am going to go ahead and remove all of the foundation paper piecing, the paper from my project here. So I like to pull it apart and just kind of score that seam with my fingers a little bit. And then I like to tear away from the seam so that I'm not putting any extra pressure on that fabric, on the stitches, as little pressure as I can. Once I have that first piece out, I'm going to gently pull on that seam to release the paper from underneath. And then I'm going to repeat, folding it away, kind of scoring it with my fingernail. I'm just trying to kind of soften up that seam, and again, tearing away. I find it's easiest to tear these away in the reverse order that you sewed them, because the overlapping seams are already taken care of as you do that. Again, just soften that. The final step for assembling our stocking front is to take our fabric B piece, and we are going to sew it to the bottom of our tree block here, and we are going to offset it so that the toe of our stocking is going to come over here to the left. So we want to make sure that the right sides of these blocks, these fabric pieces, are lined up, and then we have this little extra fabric over here to the left for the toe. So I'm just going to put those right sides together. I'm going to line up the edge here and the bottom of my block, and I'm just going to sew those pieces together. Next, I'm going to take my stocking front backing fabric, which I am just using this solid white here, and I'm going to make my quilt sandwich. So I'm going to put down my backing fabric and then my batting here. And then I am going to take my stocking, pieced stocking, and create my sandwich here. And I like to just use some basting spray to go ahead and give it a really light coat. And then I am going to take this to my machine and do a little bit of free motion quilting on it. Okay, now I have my stocking front all quilted up. I am going to take my ruler and I am going to trim off the top of this tree block 1 1/4 inches away from the top of the tree. And I'm just going to use this seam right here between the tree block and piece A to kind of guide and keep my ruler straight. And then I'm going to just use the point of that tree, and I'm going to trim this off 1 1/4 inches. Next, I'm going to take my ruler here, and again, I'm going to use this line here, this sewn seam, because I know it's straight, and I'm going to line up my ruler with the tip where it's straight up there from the center of my tree. Okay, I have this lined up with the center of the tree. I'm using this seam here and this seam here to help me keep it kind of straight and perpendicular with the top of this straight line here. And I'm just gonna stick a pin in there to mark where that center point is, so I know where the top of my tree is centered on the top up here. Then I'm going to take my stocking template here, and this marked line is the center of the top of my stocking. So I'm going to line up that line with the point that I've just marked where the center of my tree is, and then I'm going to go ahead and pin this into place, and I'm going to cut out my stocking front shape. Now you can use scissors here, you can use a rotary cutter, you do whatever method works best for you to get that all cut out. Now that I have my stocking front cut out, I need to cut out the back of my stocking and the lining. When you go to cut out the back of your stocking, you want to make sure that your template is the print side down against the right side of the fabric. We need to make a mirror image of the stocking to make sure that we can put the two pieces together. So I made that mistake. It's really frustrating. There is no way back around it. You're just gonna have to recut it out. So make sure that the printed side is down, right side down on the right side of your fabric to make sure that you are making a mirror image. Now, again, you can always audition this and put it right sides together with the stocking front to make sure that you have the mirror images of each other. So however you want to do that to make sure that you are cutting the back of the outside of your stocking the correct way, do it that way. Make sure that you double check so that you don't waste fabric. Then when you go to cut out the lining of your fabric, I recommend taking the piece that you're going to use for your lining and folding it in half so that you have either wrong sides together or right sides together. And then you can line up your stocking template. It won't matter which way, and cut out around it. And that way you can make sure that you have the mirror images. So just make sure they're either wrong sides together or right sides together so that you have that mirror image for your lining. Once you have all of those cut out, then we're ready to start assembling our stocking. To assemble our stockings, we are going to place our exterior back and our exterior front pieces right sides together. You're going to start at the top and sew all the way around using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and the ending. You're going to leave the top open. Then on the lining pieces, you are going to again put them right sides together and sew around. Use a little bit of a generous 1/4 inch seam for the lining, just so that it sits a little more smoothly inside the exterior. And the other thing you'll want to do is mark an opening at the bottom. Usually, I don't give it a good 3 inches or so here, so that you can turn it right side out once it's done. So start at the top, back stitch, sew all the way around, back stitch at the opening, back stitch when you start again, and finish the rest of the way around. In order to reduce the bulk in the seam allowances, especially in the curves to allow for a smoother curve, we are going to clip out some of the seam allowance in the places where the stocking curves. Now, my little tip for this, one of my favorite ways, is to use pinking shears. They make it really fast and easy. You just want to make sure that you don't clip into that seam and cut the thread holding the layers together. You're going to repeat the same for the lining of the stocking. You can see here that I have my opening left for turning. Once those are clipped, you're going to turn the exterior of the stocking right side out. I like to take this to my iron, use a turning tool or a hair marker or something to really get in there and push out those seams and get those curves nice and smooth. Make sure that your lining is pushed all the way to the back of the stocking. We only have one more seam and then we're done with our stocking. We're going to take our exterior of our stocking and we're going to slide it inside the lining until our tops are lined up. We're going to use the side seams in order to do that. I find it's helpful to kind of just slide it on like a glove and to help kind of push it through. So we're going to line up these side seams and make sure that they are kind of nesting in there. I like to stick a pin at the front here, and then when we get to the back, I like to make sure that they're lined up, and then we're going to take our piece of fabric for our hanger, we're going to fold it in half along the length, and then we are going to line it up and put it in between the two layers of the exterior and the lining. We're going to center it over the top of that seam and sandwich it in between those layers. And you're going to want to pin that well so that it doesn't move around. Pin the top edges so they're lined up, and then sew around that top seam using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to turn it right side out through the opening in the lining. And that's it, our stocking's done. Of course, you'll want to sew the opening in the lining closed, and then you'll push the lining down inside. Give it a really good press. You could go around and do a finishing stitch around the top of the stocking, but I just don't think that it's really necessary. And we have our hanging loop there, and it's finished. Now you have your stockings all ready for Christmas, and it's not even fall yet. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that you've learned foundation paper piecing is super fun. It's such a great technique, great sharp points, let you do angles in ways that you wouldn't otherwise, and that they turn out super fun and cute. So until I see you next time, happy sewing, friends.